I was standing on a rooftop in Seattle holding 2 plastic cups of warm champagne when Sienna Marlowe told me, very kindly, that she saw me as a brother. A brother. After 14 months of finding reasons to walk past her desk. After I had memorized the exact way she laughed when something surprised her, this short, helpless exhale like she hadn't given herself permission to enjoy it yet. After I had rehearsed this exact moment in the shower so many times that I'd basically written her a whole other response in my head, one where she smiled and said, "Took you long enough." Instead, she said, "Jordan, you're one of my favorite people. That's exactly why I don't want to mess this up." Which is what people say right before they mess it up anyway, just from the other direction. The rooftop party was for the firm, some launch celebration for a hotel renovation we'd all bled over for 8 months, and somebody had strung up cafe lights that made everyone look prettier than they had any right to look on a Tuesday. I had picked that night on purpose. I told myself if I didn't say something before the project wrapped and Sienna transferred to the Denver office, I would spend the rest of my life wondering. Turns out wondering might have been the better option. I should have said something sooner, I told her, because apparently my mouth still worked even while the rest of me had left my body and was watching this from somewhere near the rooftop bar. "No," she said, "too fast, the way people talk when they're trying to end a conversation gently and just make it worse. Don't do that. Don't turn this into your fault. I'm not. I'm being polite. You're being wounded and calling it polite." She reached out and touched my arm, and it was the single worst thing she could have done because it was exactly the kind of touch I had wanted for 14 months, except now it meant goodbye instead of hello. "You're going to make someone very happy, Jordan. Just not me." I don't remember what I said back. Something forgettable and gracious, probably, because I come from a family that treats emotional composure like a competitive sport. I remember excusing myself to get another drink I didn't want. And I remember walking straight past the bar, straight past the elevator, and out the stairwell door onto the fire escape at the back of the building, where the noise of the party turned into a low hum through the brick. That's where Norah found me. I should back up. My name is Jordan Hale. I was 29 that year, an architect 3 years into a job I loved and hated in roughly equal parts. The kind of job where you design beautiful things for other people's lives and go home to an apartment with unpainted walls because you never have the energy left over for your own. I grew up in Tacoma, the middle of 3 brothers, which taught me 2 things early: how to make myself useful and how to make myself small enough not to need anything from anyone. Both of those turned out to be terrible strategies for falling in love, though it would take Norah Whitfield the better part of a year to convince me of that. Norah lived 2 floors below me in the same building, a converted brick warehouse near Pioneer Square with fire escapes bolted to the outside like afterthoughts. She worked in restoration, actual old buildings, not metaphorical ones, though looking back I think she'd done plenty of both. We knew each other the way you know a neighbor you like, borrowed sugar, held elevator doors, the occasional Sunday where we both happened to be doing laundry at the same time, and ended up splitting a 6-pack on the shared back stairs. I liked her. I'd always liked her. It had simply never occurred to me to like her in the specific, inconvenient way I'd spent over a year liking Sienna, because Norah had never once made me feel like I needed to earn my way into her attention. She just gave it to you, easy, like it cost her nothing. Before I get to Norah, you should understand exactly how far gone I was on Sienna, because otherwise none of what happens next makes any sense. I'd started at the firm the same week she had. Both of us junior enough to be handed the projects nobody senior wanted, a strip mall renovation, a parking structure with delusions of grandeur, and there is a specific bond that forms between 2 people surviving the same unglamorous grind. We ate lunch at the same cheap noodle place twice a week. We developed a shorthand, the kind where one glance across a conference table during a client's terrible idea could make the other one bite down on a laugh. I told myself, for a long time, that this was simply what good work friendships looked like. I told myself that even as I started noticing which conference rooms had the best light for watching her work, which was an insane thing for a grown man to notice, and an even more insane thing to admit to noticing. By the time the Larkspur Hotel project landed on our desks, the one that would eventually get us both invited to that rooftop launch party, I had stopped pretending, at least to myself. I brought her coffee the specific way she liked it, oat milk, 1 pump of vanilla, no more no less, and she'd started leaving sticky notes on my monitor when a client email made her want to scream into a pillow. I'd kept every single one. I want to be honest about how far gone I was. I once described her handwriting to my brother Theo as confident, and he laughed so hard he had to sit down. Nobody describes handwriting as confident, he told me over the phone, unless they are deeply, hopelessly gone. It was confident handwriting, I said. It's cursive, Jordan. You're allowed to just say you like her hair. I didn't say it. Not to Theo, not to anyone, for 14 months, mostly because some part of me had decided that if I never said it out loud, it couldn't be wrong yet. It could stay hypothetical and safe, a feeling I was managing instead of a risk I was taking. That's a comfortable way to live for a while. It is a genuinely terrible way to actually get anywhere. That night, she happened to be at the same party. Her firm had done consulting work on the historic facade, and she happened to walk out onto the fire escape for a cigarette. She'd quit 4 times and clearly hadn't quit yet. And she happened to find me sitting on the metal grating with my tie loosened and my dignity somewhere on the floor below. "Oh no," she said, stopping in the doorway. "You've got rejection face." "I don't have a face. Everyone has rejection face. Yours looks like you just watched someone key your car." She let the door swing shut behind her, muting the party to almost nothing, and sat down next to me without asking if she could, which I appreciated more than I could have explained at the time. "Sienna?" I looked at her. "How did you know it was about Sienna?" "Jordan, you've been in love with that woman since the Larkspur project. You once described her handwriting as confident. Nobody describes handwriting as confident unless they are deeply, hopelessly gone. It was confident handwriting. It was cursive, Norah said. You're allowed to just say you liked her hair." I laughed before I meant to, this short broken sound, and something in my chest loosened half an inch. She said I'm like a brother to her. Norah winced, a real wince, sympathy without pity, which is a harder thing to pull off than people think. That's the worst one. That's worse than "it's not you." At least "it's not you" has some dignity left in it. "Brother" just puts you directly in the freezer. Thank you for that visual. I'm a comfort professional. She pulled a flask out of her jacket pocket, unscrewed the cap, and handed it to me without ceremony. "Drink this. It's terrible whiskey. It'll make you feel worse for about 4 minutes, and then strangely better." I drank it. It was, in fact, terrible whiskey. She was right about the rest of it, too. We sat out there for almost an hour while the party thinned out below us, the city lights smearing gold against a low sky that smelled like rain that hadn't decided to fall yet. Norah didn't try to fix it. She didn't tell me Sienna was making a mistake, or that I was better off, or any of the other things people say that are meant to help and mostly just remind you how bad you feel. She asked me questions instead. How long, how it started, what it was about Sienna that had gotten under my skin, and she listened the way almost nobody listens, like she wasn't waiting for her turn to talk, like the answer actually mattered to her more than the next clever thing she could say back. "Can I tell you something slightly cruel?" she asked eventually. "Given the evening I've had, sure. Pile it on. I don't think you were actually in love with her. I think you were in love with the idea of finally getting the thing you decided you wanted. Those aren't always the same thing." She glanced sideways at me. "I could be wrong. I'm regularly wrong. Ask my ex-husband." That was the first time I learned Norah had an ex-husband. It would be months before I learned the rest of that story, in pieces, the way people hand you the parts of themselves they trust you not to drop. "You could be wrong," I agreed. "But I don't think you are." "I know," she said. "It's obnoxious. I hate it about myself." She said it with a little half-smile, like being right was a habit she'd tried and failed to break, and something about that honesty, unpolished and slightly self-deprecating, sat with me longer than anything Sienna had said to me in 14 months combined. For the first few weeks after that, nothing about my life looked different from the outside. I still went to work, still sat 2 desks down from Sienna in a silence that both of us worked very hard to make look normal, still came home to the same brick building with the same fire escape bolted to the side of it like a promise nobody had made yet. But something had shifted underneath, quiet as a foundation settling. Norah started leaving her door open on Thursday nights, which was apparently when she cooked something ambitious and needed a person to inflict it on. The first Thursday, it was a paella that had gone slightly wrong in a way she refused to acknowledge. "It's supposed to be crispy on the bottom," she said, scraping at the pan with more confidence than the situation warranted. "That's a feature. That's called burnt, Norah. That's called sakarat. Educate yourself." She slid a plate across the counter at me anyway, and it was, against all odds, kind of good, in the specific way that things made with too much care sometimes are, mistakes and all. I brought a 6-pack the next Thursday without being asked, and the one after that I brought dessert, and by the fourth Thursday neither of us was pretending this was anything other than a standing appointment. We didn't talk about it. We just showed up. The second Thursday, she attempted a souffle that collapsed the moment she opened the oven door, and instead of being embarrassed about it, she scooped the wreckage onto 2 plates and declared it deconstructed. "Deconstructed," I repeated, poking at what was, structurally speaking, just a sad, eggy pancake. "It's a plating philosophy. Very avant-garde. You're lucky to be experiencing it." She took a bite and grimaced immediately. "Okay, it's also bad. But it's bad on purpose now, which is different." "Is it though? Don't argue with the deconstruction, Jordan." The third Thursday, she'd pulled an all-nighter finishing structural drawings for a client who kept changing his mind, and she fell asleep sitting up on her own kitchen floor halfway through explaining a load-bearing wall to me. I sat there for 20 minutes not moving, afraid that shifting even slightly would wake her, until my leg went entirely numb and I had to accept defeat and gently nudge her shoulder. "I wasn't asleep," she mumbled into my arm, eyes still closed. "I was resting my argument." "You were snoring your argument." "I don't snore." "You absolutely snore. It's very endearing. I'm not going to tell you that again, so savor it." She'd laughed without opening her eyes, and something about the sound of it, rough and unguarded and half asleep, lodged itself somewhere under my ribs and stayed there. By the fourth Thursday, we had unspoken rules. She always cooked. I always brought whatever the meal was missing, which she never told me in advance, and I somehow always guessed right. Bread, or the good Parmesan, or once, memorably, a fire extinguisher, which she still brings up whenever she wants to win an argument. That was one time, I told her, months later, when she trotted it out during an entirely unrelated debate about paint colors. It was one time because I now check the stove before I answer the door. "You're welcome for my improved safety habits. I'd like credit." "You'll get credit in my eulogy. Somewhere in the middle. Not the opening line." That was Nora's particular gift, I came to understand. She made ordinary Tuesdays and Thursdays feel like they had stakes worth showing up for, without ever once making it feel like a performance. Sienna had made me feel like I was auditioning for something. Norah made me feel like I'd already been cast, and now we were just figuring out the blocking together. "You know what I like about you," she said one of those nights, cross-legged on her kitchen floor, because her table was buried under blueprints for a lighthouse restoration on the coast. "You don't perform for me." "Is that a compliment?" "It's the highest compliment I have. Most men perform, even the good ones. They've got this whole audition running under the surface. Are you impressed yet? Are you impressed yet? You just exist. It's restful." "I'm too tired to perform," I said. Sienna took all my performing. Sienna's loss. My gain, apparently, since I get the unperforming version. She said it lightly, tossed off, but something under it landed differently, and I noticed, the way you notice a change in air pressure before you understand it's about to storm. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself that for a long time, actually longer than the evidence supported, because admitting otherwise meant admitting I'd been wrong about what I wanted, and I did not enjoy being wrong about things. I had built my whole self-image around being the guy who thought clearly, planned ahead, didn't get blindsided by his own feelings. Norah blindsided me from 2 floors down, one terrible paella at a time. It was October before I let myself notice the specific things. The way she talked with her hands when she got excited about a building, like she could shape the words into something structural. The scar on her left eyebrow from, and I quote, an argument with a bicycle that the bicycle won. The way she said my name when she was actually asking me something, versus the way she said it when she was teasing me. Two completely different words that happened to share the same 4 letters. I noticed I looked forward to Thursdays the way I used to look forward to walking past Sienna's desk. Except this felt different in the actual chemistry of it. Steadier, warmer, less like standing at the edge of something, and more like already being inside it. There was a night in late October I still think about more than any of the others. Norah had a fever, some low, ugly flu that had been circulating through her office, and she'd texted me around 8 to cancel our standing Thursday, apologizing 3 separate times in 3 separate messages for something that obviously required no apology. I showed up anyway, 20 minutes later, with a grocery bag full of the only things I could remember my mother buying whenever one of us got sick as kids: ginger ale, saltines, a rotisserie chicken I intended to turn into soup despite having never once made soup in my life. "You didn't have to do this," she said, opening the door in a robe with her hair scraped back and her nose pink and raw, looking, by her own later admission, like a swamp creature, and looking to me, at the time, like something I wanted to spend a great deal more effort protecting. "I know I didn't have to. You're going to catch this. Worth it." I held up the bag. "I'm making soup. I want to be upfront that I have no qualifications for this. None. I watched a video once. On my phone. Standing in the grocery store." She laughed, which turned into a cough, which turned into her waving me inside before I let all the cold air into her apartment. "I made the soup badly. Too much salt. Chicken slightly underdone in places, and she ate it anyway, sitting wrapped in a blanket on her couch with a mug of it balanced on her knees, watching me over the rim with an expression I couldn't quite name yet. Nobody's done this for me in a long time," she said quietly, somewhere around her second bowl. "Shown up, I mean. Just because. That surprises me. You seem like someone people show up for. People show up for the version of me that's fun at parties. It's a different thing, getting someone to show up when you look like this." She gestured vaguely at herself, robe and pink nose and all. "My ex-husband didn't, toward the end. He'd find reasons to work late whenever I was sick. I didn't clock it as a pattern until it was too late to unclock it. I didn't say anything clever back. I didn't have anything clever, honestly, sitting there watching her admit something that clearly cost her to admit. I just reached over and pulled the blanket a little higher on her shoulder, and she let me. And something quiet and enormous settled into place between us that neither of us named out loud for another 2 months, but that I think we both understood, right there in that overheated living room that smelled like bad soup and ginger ale, had already been decided. "You're staring," Norah said one night, not looking up from the crossword she was murdering. "I'm thinking. You think with your whole face. It's very distracting. What's the 7-letter word for unexpected? Starts with an S." "Sudden," I said, though I was looking directly at her when I said it. And something in the pause afterward told me she'd caught the layer underneath, even if neither of us was ready to say so out loud yet. She filled in the boxes without comment. But her ears went pink, and Norah Whitfield's ears going pink was, I would later learn, roughly the equivalent of most people setting off a flare, a tell she never quite managed to control no matter how composed the rest of her stayed. The rival beat, if you want to call it that, arrived from 2 directions at once, which felt frankly unfair. The first was Marcus. Marcus showed up at Norah's building in early November, tall and easy smiling, carrying a box of her mail that had apparently been misdelivered to his new place 3 blocks over. Norah introduced him as someone I used to know, which is the kind of phrase that tells you everything by refusing to tell you anything. "We dated for a while," she told me later, after he'd gone, sitting on the fire escape with her knees pulled up to her chest. "Before the divorce. Actually, overlapping with the divorce, if I'm being honest, which I try to be even when it's inconvenient. Is he why you don't talk about your marriage? He's part of it. My ex-husband is the bigger part. Marcus was just easy. Easy in the specific way that's actually a warning sign and not a compliment. She glanced at me. Why do you look like you swallowed a bee? The mail incident should have ended there. It didn't. 2 days later, our building's tiny lobby, which normally saw nothing more dramatic than the mail carrier and the occasional lost delivery driver, suddenly had Marcus in it again, this time holding a bottle of wine and explaining to the building manager that he was just stopping by to see an old friend. I came down for my own mail and found him leaning against the mailboxes like he owned a share of the building. Jordan, right? He said, extending a hand with the easy confidence of a man who has never once doubted whether a room wanted him in it. Norah's mentioned you. The neighbor. The neighbor, I repeated, shaking his hand and hating how firm his handshake was, which is an unreasonable thing to hold against a man, but I held it against him anyway. She said you two have gotten close since the divorce settled. He said it lightly, but his eyes did a quick assessment, the kind men do when they're deciding whether someone is competition. Good. She deserves people looking out for her. That marriage did a number on her. She's not fragile, I said, more sharply than I meant to. She's just careful now. There's a difference. Something shifted in his expression, brief but real, like he'd been recalibrating. Right, he said. Of course. He held up the wine bottle. Tell her I stopped by, if you see her first. I did not tell her he stopped by. I told myself that was an oversight and not a decision, which was, in retrospect, a lie I was telling only myself. Looking back, that was the first real crack in whatever careful arrangement I'd made with myself about not naming what was happening between Norah and me. The moment jealousy showed up uninvited and made it impossible to keep pretending this was just Thursdays and burnt paella. I don't look like anything. You have rejection face again. Different flavor this time. She bumped her shoulder into mine, and I let her, though I noted with some alarm how much that small contact rearranged my whole nervous system. Jordan, he came by to drop off mail. That's it. Okay. You don't sound okay. I wasn't, particularly, though it took me another week of watching Marcus find reasons to be in our building's lobby, a package here, a just checking in there, before I let myself understand why. I had spent over a year mistaking obsession for love with Sienna, and now here I was, quietly furious over a man delivering mail, and the two feelings did not resemble each other even slightly. This one had weight to it. This one felt like something worth protecting. The second direction arrived the following week, when Sienna, Denver-bound Sienna, brothers-owning Sienna, stopped by my desk with her coat already on and said, "Can I ask you something that's probably none of my business? When has that ever stopped anyone?" Fair. She perched on the edge of my desk, the way she used to when we were still pretending our friendship was the whole story. Are you seeing someone? You've seemed, I don't know, lighter. Since the party. I'm not seeing anyone. Which was, at the time, technically true, in the way that answers can be technically true and still misleading. Huh. She studied me a beat too long. You should. You deserve someone who doesn't need 14 months to figure out how she feels about you. That an apology? It's the closest I'm going to get before I leave for Denver. She smiled, softer than I expected. For what it's worth, I like being your almost. I just wasn't the right almost. I appreciated the honesty. I also noticed, with something like relief, that it landed nowhere near as hard as it would have 3 months earlier. The wound had healed crooked into something that didn't hurt the same way anymore, mostly because I had spent every Thursday since October learning what it felt like to be looked at by someone who'd already decided I was worth looking at. The trouble started, as trouble does, with good intentions and bad timing. Norah's firm won the lighthouse restoration bid, the big one she'd been chasing for 2 years, and the celebration dinner happened to fall on the same night Marcus texted her. Congrats. Heard through the grapevine. Drinks on me? And she said yes without thinking too hard about it, because that's how Norah operated, generous with her time in a way that occasionally cost her. I found out because I walked past the wine bar 2 blocks from our building on my way home and saw them through the window, Norah laughing at something, Marcus leaning in close the way men lean in when they're hoping the leaning does some of the talking for them. I didn't go in. I went home, and I sat on my side of the fire escape instead of hers for the first time in months. And when she knocked on my door around 10, still smelling faintly of the bar, I opened it with a version of myself I didn't love very much. "Hey," she said, holding up a small paper bag. "I brought you the good bread from that place you like." I thought, was that a date? She blinked. "What? Marcus? Tonight? Was that a date?" Something in her face closed, quick, like a door catching wind. "It was drinks. He congratulated me on the lighthouse contract." "That's not what I asked." "I know what you asked." Her voice went careful in a way I hadn't heard from her before, all the easiness drained out of it. "Why does it matter, Jordan?" And there it was, the actual question, the one I'd been avoiding since October because answering it meant admitting how much ground I'd covered without ever officially deciding to walk. I stood there in my doorway with every true thing available to me and said none of them. "It doesn't," I said. "Forget it." I watched it land. I watched something in her expression go from hopeful to hurt to carefully blank, 3 separate weather systems moving across her face in under 4 seconds. "Okay," she said quietly. "Enjoy the bread." She left the bag on the floor of my doorway and went back down the stairs, and I stood there like an idiot listening to her door, close 2 floors below, understanding with total clarity that I had just done to her exactly what Sienna had done to me at that rooftop party. Except worse, because Sienna at least had the excuse of not knowing what she was throwing away. I didn't sleep. I lay there running the conversation backward, trying to find the version of it where I said the true thing instead of the safe thing, and every version I built ended the same way. With me finally saying it, and Norah finally hearing it, and neither of those things having actually happened, because I'd chosen composure over honesty at the exact moment honesty was the only thing that mattered. I thought about my brothers, about growing up making myself small and useful so nobody would have to deal with my needing anything. I thought about 14 months of loving someone who never once asked me a real question about myself, and 8 weeks of loving someone who asked me real questions constantly, and I still hadn't managed to answer the one that counted. Around 2 in the morning, I got up and stood at my window, looking down at the fire escape where this whole thing had started, and I thought about the flu night, the soup, the way she'd said nobody's done this for me in a long time like it was a confession instead of a compliment. I thought about the specific coward's logic I'd been running for 2 months, that if I never said the word love out loud, I could keep enjoying the feeling of it without ever risking the version of myself that gets to lose something real. That had never once been a strategy. It had just been fear wearing a very convincing disguise. I thought about Marcus too, if I'm honest, though not in the way I expected to. I wasn't actually afraid Norah wanted him. I was afraid that if I stayed quiet long enough, I'd eventually give her a real reason to want someone who wasn't quiet, someone who'd tell her the true thing at the actual moment it mattered, instead of hours later on a stairwell at 6 in the morning after a full night spent working up the nerve. By the time the sky started going gray outside my window, I'd stopped rehearsing and started just repeating one sentence to myself, over and over, until it stopped sounding terrifying and started sounding like the only sentence that had ever mattered. I am in love with her, and I am done pretending otherwise. At 6 in the morning, I went down to the 2nd floor and knocked on Norah's door before I could talk myself out of it. It took a while. When she opened it, she was in an old college sweatshirt, hair a mess, eyes that told me she hadn't slept much better than I had. "It's 6 a.m., Jordan. I know. I'm sorry. Can I say the thing I didn't say last night?" She crossed her arms, guarded, which was fair, which was exactly what I deserved. "Go ahead. It matters because I've been in love with you since roughly October, possibly earlier, and I was too much of a coward to say it because saying it meant admitting I got it wrong with Sienna and right with you in a way that didn't make sense according to any plan I'd made for myself. And last night when I saw you with Marcus, I didn't feel jealous the way I felt jealous with Sienna. I felt terrified because it made me realize how much I have to lose if I keep pretending this is just Thursdays in Paella. Norah didn't say anything for a long moment. The building was quiet around us, the pipes ticking somewhere in the walls, the the first gray light coming up outside her window. "That's a lot to say at 6 a.m., she finally said. "I've had practice. I rehearsed it on the stairs." A small, unwilling smile pulled at the corner of her mouth. "You rehearsed?" "I told you. I think with my whole face. Apparently, I also panic with my whole personality. Marcus and I are not a thing," she said. "We were never going to be a thing again. I went because it felt easier than explaining to him why I didn't want to, and that's on me, and I'm sorry it looked like something it wasn't." She uncrossed her arms slowly. "But you don't get to ask me a real question and then take it back the second it gets uncomfortable, Jordan. I've done that dance before. I got divorced because of that dance. I know. I'm not. I'm done doing that dance. That's what I'm trying to tell you." "Prove it," she said, not unkindly, just honest, the way she was always honest. "Don't tell me. Show me. I've had enough men explain their feelings to me in beautifully worded paragraphs. I want the boring, unglamorous version. Show up. Keep showing up. That's the whole ask, Jordan. It's not complicated, and it's not romantic, and it's the only thing that's ever actually mattered to me." "Okay," I said. "Starting now." I stepped forward and kissed her before either of us could think of a clever thing to say about it. And she made a small startled sound against my mouth before she kissed me back, one hand fisting in the front of my shirt like she was making sure I couldn't take this one back either. When we broke apart, she rested her forehead against mine, breathing unsteady. That was better than the bread. High praise. I don't give it lightly. We didn't rush anything after that, which surprised people who'd watched the whole thing unfold from a safe distance. My mother met Norah for the first time at Thanksgiving, 3 months after the fire escape conversation, where I'd finally told the truth, and she spent the entire dinner watching us with the specific, unsettling focus of a woman building a case. "You reach for her water glass before she does, every single time," my mother said afterward, cornering me by the sink while Norah helped my sister-in-law wrangle 2 toddlers into pajamas in the next room. "You did that 3 times. You don't even know you're doing it. Is that a bad thing?" "It's the opposite of a bad thing, truly. Your father used to do that for me. I noticed on our 3rd date, and I told my sister that night I was going to marry him. She dried a plate with more focus than the plate required. You never did that with the other one. The office one. Sienna. I wasn't going to say her name. I don't like giving her the credit of a full sentence." My mother set the plate down and looked at me properly, the way she used to when I was 12 and about to get a piece of real advice whether I wanted it or not. "You were careful with Sienna, Jordan. Careful like you were protecting yourself. You're not careful with Norah. You're just present. It's a different thing entirely, and I think you know it." My brother Theo cornered me an hour later with considerably less subtlety, beer in hand, nodding toward the living room where Norah was letting his 4-year-old braid a section of her hair into something structurally ambitious and completely lopsided. "So the confident handwriting girl is old news," he said. "You're never going to let that go." "Absolutely not. It's one of my favorite things about you." He clinked his bottle against mine. "This one's different, though. Even I can see it, and I once dated someone for 2 years without noticing she hated me." "She didn't hate you. She married my roommate 4 months after we broke up, Jordan. She hated me." He nodded toward Norah again, laughing now at something my niece had said, hair listing dangerously to one side. "Don't overthink this one. You overthink everything. Don't overthink this." I didn't, in the end. Or rather, I did, extensively, for another 2 months, and then I stopped. But Norah had learned the hard way what happened when she moved fast on a feeling, and I had learned the hard way what happened when I didn't move on one at all. So we met somewhere in the careful middle. Thursdays stayed Thursdays. The paella got marginally less burnt. I started leaving my door open too, on the nights I cooked, which was less often and considerably less ambitious. Mostly grilled cheese and the specific kind of tomato soup that comes from a can and tastes like childhood. Spring came and went in the particular blur of 2 people learning how to build an actual life instead of just an actual feeling. Norah's lighthouse project moved into its final phase, which meant weeks where she'd come home coated in dust and salt air, too exhausted to do more than collapse against my shoulder on the couch while I read her the day's texts from my niece, who had recently decided Norah was her favorite adult on the basis of the lopsided braid incident and had not been talked out of it since. We fought exactly twice that spring, both times briefly and both times about nothing that mattered in retrospect. Once about whose turn it was to deal with the building's ancient, malicious radiator. Once about a dinner with her sister that I'd forgotten and she'd assumed I'd remembered. Neither fight lasted past dessert. That was the thing I hadn't understood about real love before Norah. I'd always imagined it as the absence of conflict, some frictionless state two people arrived at once they'd found the right match. It wasn't that. It was two ordinary people getting annoyed at each other over a radiator and choosing, every time, to stay in the room anyway. You know what's different about this? Norah said one night in May. Both of us sprawled on her floor surrounded by fabric swatches for the Lighthouse gift shop she was helping design, a task that had nothing to do with restoration and everything to do with her being incapable of leaving a project half-finished. You don't disappear when things get annoying. You just get annoyed and stay. Where would I go? You have the good couch. I'm serious. I know you are. I picked up a swatch of deep blue linen and held it against her wrist, checking it against nothing in particular, just wanting an excuse to hold her hand a moment longer. My ex. Not that I had a real one, but there was a girl in college. Used to say I ran when things got hard. Emotionally, I mean. Not literally, though there was one incident at a party involving an actual door. I need the door story. Later. The point is, I used to think that was just who I was. Someone who leaves when the temperature rises. I set the swatch down. I don't do that with you. I don't even want to. I don't understand it. Honestly, I just know it's true. She didn't say anything clever back that time either. She just leaned over and kissed me. Unhurried, the swatches forgotten between us, and I remember thinking, somewhere in the middle of it, that I had spent 14 months chasing a feeling that had never once made me feel this steady, and I had found the real thing 2 floors down without even meaning to go looking. By August I had the ring. I'd bought it a month earlier, on an ordinary Tuesday lunch break, standing in a jewelry store 2 blocks from the office feeling like the floor might give out from under me. And then I'd carried it around in my jacket pocket for 4 straight weeks, waiting for the right moment to arrive, instead of understanding that the right moment was simply the one I chose to make. It was the following September, almost exactly a year after that rooftop party, when I brought her back out onto the fire escape. She didn't know that was the plan. She thought we were going up for the view, because the building's roof access had just reopened after repairs, and she'd been wanting to see the skyline from up there since she moved in. I steered her toward the fire escape instead, the same rusted metal stairs where she'd found me with a broken heart and terrible whiskey exactly 1 year earlier. Wait, she said, catching on, looking around at the familiar grating, the same brick, the same view of the alley and the strip of sky above it. Isn't this? Sit down a second. Jordan, my knees are going to leave rust marks on my good jeans. Sit down anyway. She sat, still half laughing, half confused, and I sat down across from her instead of beside her for the first time since we'd started doing this, which she noticed immediately, because Norah noticed everything. You're doing the thing with your face again, she said, quieter now. I know. My hands weren't entirely steady when I reached into my jacket pocket, and I watched her stop breathing when she understood what I was holding. A year ago you sat right here and told me I wasn't actually in love. I was in love with the idea of finally getting what I thought I wanted. You were right, by the way. I've been meaning to tell you that for months. Jordan, I know now what the real thing feels like. It feels like Thursdays. It feels like burnt rice you insist on calling a feature. It feels like being furious over a man delivering mail and realizing it's because I couldn't survive losing you. Not because I was possessive, but because somewhere in the last year you became the person I check in with before I've even fully had the thought. That's not almost. That's not brother energy. My voice cracked slightly on the last word and I let it. Because she'd asked me once to stop performing, and I intended to keep that promise for the rest of my life if she'd let me. I don't want to keep showing up on Thursdays anymore, Norah. I want to show up every day. I want to marry you. She was crying before I finished the sentence, one hand pressed over her mouth, the other reaching for mine on the cold metal grating between us. "You absolute disaster," she said, half a laugh, half a sob. "You made me cry on a fire escape. Is that a yes?" It was always going to be a yes. I just needed you to catch up. She pulled her hand back only long enough to hold it out, steady now, waiting. "Yes, Jordan. Obviously yes." I slid the ring onto her finger with hands that were shaking for entirely different reasons than they'd been shaking a year ago, and when she kissed me this time, the whole city seemed to lean in and hold still for it. Same as it had the night, she found me broken on this exact landing and decided, without ever saying so out loud, that she was going to stay. We got married the following June, in the small courtyard behind the lighthouse she'd spent 2 years restoring. Because Norah said if she was going to promise herself to someone forever, she wanted to do it somewhere she'd already proven she could fix something broken and make it hold light again. It rained that morning, a Real Pacific Northwest downpour that had the caterers panicking and my mother convinced the whole thing was cursed. And then, 20 minutes before the ceremony, it stopped completely, the clouds pulling back just enough to let the light through in long gold columns across the wet grass. Norah stood at the top of the courtyard steps in a dress with no lace and no fuss. Exactly the kind of dress she'd insisted on over her sister's objections. And when she started down toward me, I forgot every single vow I'd rehearsed. I ended up saying most of it off the cuff, badly, my voice cracking on the same word it had cracked on that morning on the fire escape, and she laughed through her tears in exactly the same way she had then. Like crying and laughing had never been two separate things to her at all. My brother stood up with me, Theo elbowing me hard in the ribs right before I said I do, which I'm fairly sure was intentional. My mother cried through the whole thing without apology. Nora's father, who had walked her partway down the aisle before stepping back so she could finish it alone, her choice, not a statement about him, just something she'd needed to do since the divorce, stood at the edge of the courtyard wiping his eyes with a napkin he'd clearly stolen off a table. Sienna sent a card from Denver that said, simply, "I'm glad it was you too. You deserve the real thing." I keep it in a drawer, not because I need reminding, but because it's a good reminder anyway, that sometimes the version of love you spend a year chasing isn't actually the one with your name on it, and the real one is sometimes 2 floors down, leaving her door open on Thursdays, waiting for you to notice. We live in that same brick building now, 3 floors up instead of split between 2, with a fire escape outside our bedroom window that we still sit on some nights, coffee instead of whiskey, no rejection left to nurse. Norah keeps a chipped blue mug on the windowsill out there, the one she handed me that very first night, the one I never gave back, and every anniversary, she fills it with terrible whiskey and hands it over again, just to make me laugh, just to remind us both where this actually started. Some nights we don't even talk much out there anymore, and that's its own kind of proof, I think, that the silence with her has never once felt like the silence I used to hide inside growing up, careful and small and waiting to be needed. It just feels like rest. Theo still brings up the confident handwriting comment at every family dinner. And my mother still tells anyone who'll listen about the water glass, and Norah still insists, loudly and often, that her paella has never once been burnt, only structurally ambitious. I let her have that one. I let her have most of them, honestly, because somewhere in the middle of losing the thing I thought I wanted, I found the person I actually needed, sitting 2 floors down with a flask of terrible whiskey and absolutely no intention of fixing me, just staying, which turned out to be the only thing I ever actually needed fixed. Because it didn't start with Sienna at all. It started with the woman who showed up after the heartbreak, who never once tried to fix me, who just sat down on cold metal and stayed until I understood what I actually wanted. Sometimes that's exactly how the real thing arrives, not as the answer to the question you were asking, but as the person who was there all along while you were asking it to someone else. What would you have done if your crush turned you down and the person who comforted you afterward turned out to be the one you were supposed to end up with all along? Has something like that ever happened in your own life? Has the wrong person leaving ever made room for the right one to walk in? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this one, longer, exclusive, no ads, dropping every week, we've opened up channel memberships, and I would genuinely love to have you there. It's a small corner of the channel, but it's the one where I get to tell the stories I don't have room for anywhere else, and I think you'd like it. If you enjoyed this one, hit like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.